In the dim corners of forgotten villages, where lanterns swing in windless silence and shadows linger longer than they should, there are stories never meant to be told aloud. Welcome to FolkFear, a place where ancestral whispers bloom like mold through floorboards, where rituals are etched in blood and bone, and the dead do not rest until their names are spoken. Tonight, you'll hear the tale of a veil, not just fabric, but a thread between worlds. A cursed keepsake stitched with the breath of brides who were never meant to live, and grooms who were never truly dead. This is a legend whispered only in hushed tones beside flickering candles. A folk horror tale rooted in ghost marriages, ancestral vengeance, and a red veil that remembers every vow ever broken. So draw your curtains, dim your lights, and listen closely. The Red Veil Keepsake, a haunting folk horror tale, begins now. The road vanished into mist long before Lan realized she was lost. The car's engine rumbled beneath her as if it too resented the climb, coughing on the gravel path coiling up the side of the mountain. No signs, no GPS signal, and no lights. Only the occasional rustle of bamboo in the fog, like someone shifting just out of view. She should have turned back hours ago, but the pull was stronger than reason, stronger than fear. Some stories start with curiosity, others begin with need. Lan's was both. She was 34, a folklorist by trade and inheritance. Her mother had cataloged death rites along the Mekong Delta. Her grandmother had been the last known keeper of a bridal chant, sung only during spirit weddings, those rituals that bound the living to the dead in veils, ashes, and red thread. Lan had buried them both, and yet she still heard them, in dreams, in dusk, in old songs carried on the wind. Now she was chasing a rumor that had been no more than a footnote in a disintegrating journal, a village that buried its daughters in wedding dresses and never named the grooms. A light appeared ahead, yellow and trembling. She pulled over. It was a lantern, swaying from a rusted metal hook outside what looked like a small house, wooden stilts, blackened tiles, shuttered windows. A woman stepped out of the doorway, cloaked in dark layers. Her face was more shadow than skin. "You came," the woman said. Lan hesitated, stepping out into the damp mountain air. "This is Yanlu Village, isn't it?" The woman gave no answer. Instead, she opened the door wide. "We have been waiting." Inside, the home was sparse. Clay jars, worn floor mats, incense smoke clinging to wooden beams. In the corner sat a red lacquered chest, bound in rope and dust. "Sit," the woman said. "You are cold." Lan did as she was told. "I'm here about the ghost brides, the marriages held for the dead." The woman's fingers paused mid-teacup. "No one marries here anymore," she murmured. "Not for 50 years. But there were once. A long time ago, before the mountain took what it wanted." She poured tea. The liquid was dark and fragrant, almost bitter. Lan drank anyway. "I'm Lan," she offered. "My family came from Yen Ti. My grandmother spoke of this village before she died. She said the red veils here were different." The old woman's eyes, sunken and glassy, turned toward the lacquer chest. "Not veils," she whispered. "Not anymore." Lan leaned in. "Do you have one?" The woman didn't speak again. Instead, she rose slowly and approached the chest. Her hands, twisted by age or toil, unknotted the rope and pulled the lid open. Inside was silk, the color of dried blood. The veil lay folded in impossible stillness, untouched by air, it seemed, yet breathing of its own accord. Threads of gold danced through the weave like veins beneath old skin. But it wasn't the color of it or the weight of it that chilled Lan's spine. It was the pattern. Etched along the hem in meticulous embroidery were names, faint, faded, some scratched out, and one freshly added, stitched not in thread, but in a darker color. Lan's. "I didn't sew that," the old woman said. Lan didn't speak, couldn't. The veil was warm beneath her fingers, too warm. Each bride that wore it vanished after the rite, after the wedding. Lan tried to steady her breath. Vanished where? The woman didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, "They never buried the grooms." That night, Lan stayed in the guest room, an annex of the old house, with a single flickering candle and a mirror so tarnished it barely reflected. She placed the veil in her satchel, unsure why she took it, perhaps to examine, perhaps to preserve, perhaps to destroy. Outside, the fog thickened, clinging to the stilts of the house like mourning hands. Somewhere in the bamboo, bells chimed softly. Wind? No, they were ceremonial. She should have locked the window, but by the time she heard the footsteps, a soft padding like bare feet on rotting wood, it was already open. The candle died, and in the dark she saw the veil rise from the bag and drift toward the mirror, not like silk caught in wind, but like a bride walking. Lan awoke gasping, fingers gripping the sweat-soaked sheets. Morning light crept in pale and thin. The window was closed now. The veil was folded again, untouched. But the mirror? In the dust and fog of its surface, someone had traced a character in a trembling hand. Chö, to marry. When Lan emerged into the village square, the air was brittle with silence. A few faces peered from behind curtains. Doors shut as she passed. No one greeted her. Only the woman from last night waited at the well, her hands clasped tight around a rosary of dried peach pits. "You shouldn't stay," she said. "I need to know the story, why the brides vanished, why the grooms were never named." The old woman stared at her, eyes hollow. "Because the dead do not forget, and that veil still remembers." Lan glanced at her bag. It was already open, and the red veil had unwrapped itself like a flower blooming in blood. The next morning arrived without sunlight, only the grayness of a sky that seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. A slow drizzle fell through the fog, each drop tapping the roof like a finger that refused to stop knocking. Lan stood by the window of the guest house, the red veil folded on the table beside her. She could still smell it, faint sandalwood, dust, and something sweetly metallic, like old coins or blood. She opened her notebook and began to write. Yanlu Village. Subject, local ghost marriage customs. Object of study, red wedding veil found beneath domestic altar. Condition, intact, names embroidered. Personal note, one of the names, mine. Her pen stopped. The ink refused to flow, as if the air itself had thickened. When she looked up, she saw a trail of wet footprints leading from the door to the table where the veil lay. They ended there, beneath the silk, as though someone had come to claim it during the night. Lan forced herself outside. The village stretched along a single stone path, houses crouching under the weight of moss. No dogs barked, no birds sang, only the distant groan of wind through bamboo, low and human. An old man chopping wood paused when he saw her. His hands trembled on the axe. "You should leave," he said, eyes fixed on her satchel. "I'm looking for records about a girl named May." The axe slipped. The man's breath hitched. There was no May, only the bride who never walked. He pointed toward the northern slope where the fog thickened into a wall. She was carried there long ago. The drum beat once, then stopped. No one heard her again. Lon followed the path until the houses thinned into terraces. There, half swallowed by vines, stood the remnants of a wooden pavilion. The boards had rotted, but the pillars still bore faint carvings of lotus and phoenix, symbols of a wedding long forgotten. She stepped closer. Under the debris, she found a porcelain hairpin shaped like a peony. Its stem was stained crimson. As she turned it in her hand, a drop of water landed on her wrist, warm, though the rain was cold. Another followed, then another. When she looked up, the air above the pavilion shimmered as if something invisible wept into the world below. Lan whispered, "May?" The wind answered, not in sound, but in movement. The veil inside her satchel stirred. A single thread uncoiled and slid down to the ground, winding toward the pavilion like a vein seeking its heart. Back at the guest house, Lan sought the old woman again. She found her kneeling before a tiny household altar, feeding the incense with trembling fingers. "You found her place," the woman said without turning. "You knew I would." The woman sighed. May was promised to a man who died before the wedding. His family demanded the ceremony proceed. To unite their spirits, they placed the veil over her head and led her to the coffin. But when they opened it, the corpse had turned to ash, so they buried her alone. Alone? No, the veil was buried with her. But after the seventh night, it was gone, and the footsteps began. Lan felt the chill crawl up her spine. Footsteps? Every year, on the night of her wedding, she walks. They say she searches for her groom, or perhaps for anyone who will finish the vow. The woman turned at last, eyes dull as candle wax. If she chooses you, the veil will move again. That night, Lan set up her recording device beside the veil. She whispered into the mic, "Day 2, test for environmental activity." Then she blew out the candle and lay still. For a while, nothing but rain. Then, faintly, the soft rustle of fabric. The recorder caught the sound, an irregular rhythm, not unlike breathing beneath cloth. Lan's eyes snapped open. Across the room, a figure stood by the window, the shape of a woman, the red veil draped over her face, long hair spilling down like ink in water. Lan tried to move but couldn't. The figure turned slowly toward her, the veil shimmering in the dark. Beneath it, two pale feet hovered just above the floorboards. They never ended. No step, no weight, only the faint scent of jasmine and soil. "Who are you?" Lan whispered. The answer came not in words, but in the faintest sigh, a bride's last exhale before the vow. When morning returned, the recorder was still running. The file lasted exactly 3 hours and 13 minutes. It ended with the creak of a door and a woman's voice whispering in a dialect no one had spoken in a century. Lan replayed it again and again, tracing the sound. She caught one word she recognized: return. Lan pressed her palm against her satchel. Inside, the veil felt heavier, and when she lifted it to the light, she saw a new stitch running along the hem, tiny, perfect, and wet, spelling a single character in dark red thread. Lie, meaning come. Lan sat cross-legged on the guest house floor, veil stretched across her lap like an altar cloth. It didn't just shimmer, it breathed. The silk rippled when she wasn't looking, and the stitches along the hem pulsed faintly under the candlelight, like veins awakened by her touch. She ran gloved fingers over the embroidery, whispering each character aloud. Some were names, some were dates, some were curses. She paused at a strange pattern stitched near the center, a tangled knot of red and black silk. From afar, it looked decorative. Up close, it resembled a noose. Later that morning, she wandered into the market square, if it could be called that. A few stalls leaned wearily against each other. Chickens picked at the moss between cobblestones, and every vendor turned her face when she passed, except one. An old seamstress with cataract-clouded eyes and fingers like hooked wire was working silently at her loom. Red thread. She approached cautiously. "Do you know this?" she asked, unfolding the veil just enough to show its edge. The woman's fingers stopped mid-motion. Her head tilted slowly, as if hearing something Lan could not. "Not yours. Not anymore." "What do you mean?" The old seamstress gestured toward the embroidered edge. "That thread has been sewn and unsewn, again and again. Every time the veil chooses a bride, a new name is added. Every time she disappears, the thread blackens." Lan squinted. "But these names, why are some scratched out?" "Because those who tried to escape were never allowed peace. Their names were cursed off the fabric, unwritten from life." Lan returned to the guest house and laid the veil flat. She took out her magnifier, scanning the silk again. The more she studied the hem, the more she realized something was deeply wrong. Each name bled slightly into the silk, as if inked with more than dye. She tested one faint letter with a swab. It came back pink, blood, and not old, still wet beneath the thread. That night she dreamed of sewing, not with her hands, but with her veins. The needle moved on its own, pulling red thread from her fingertips, binding her skin to the veil. Her breath came in stuttered gasps as the stitches wound around her body, corseting her to something that did not breathe, but waited. When she awoke, her wrists were bleeding. 2 perfect punctures, no thread, but the pain lingered like memory. She turned to the veil, still folded, still, but now a silver needle lay atop it, and she hadn't packed one. She sought out the seamstress again. This time the woman was not alone. 2 other women, older still, sat beside her on the porch of an abandoned tailor shop. In front of them were several veils, faded and brittle from years. None of them were red. "They changed the color after the curse," said the first woman, without being asked. "No more red. Red was too loud. It called to the dead." Lan placed the veil before them. The second woman inhaled sharply. "This one, this veil, it's not just red. Look closer. There are strands of hair in the weave." Lan leaned in. Indeed, beneath the surface sheen of silk, there were individual hairs, long, fine, black, twisted into the threads like offerings. Each bride gave a lock of her hair before the ceremony, and the matchmaker wove it in. They said it helped the spirits recognize their bride, made the binding stronger. The third woman spoke now, her voice barely a breath. "But one girl, she gave all her hair, cut it off, laid it at the altar." "Why?" "She was never meant to be married. The veil was forced on her. Her family needed the dowry from the dead man's family. She gave all her hair as a protest." Lan swallowed. What happened to her? The seamstress looked directly at her now. She never walked again. At dusk, Lan brought the veil to the edge of the village where the path turned to forest. She laid it on a flat stone and lit incense. She didn't know why, only that it felt appropriate. She closed her eyes and chanted a bridal vow her grandmother had once recited in a cracked recording. I bind myself to shadow and soil, to ash and incense, vow and veil. If you call me, I will come. If you wait, I will walk. The forest grew quiet, too quiet. The insects fell still. The birds stopped. The air pressed in. And then a sound. Not footsteps, not breathing. Sewing. The click of a needle against bone. Lan opened her eyes. The veil was gone. She stood, heart hammering, ready to flee, but the veil now hung in a tree, stretched between two branches like a web. On it was a new name, in letters she did not recognize. But when she blinked, the name rearranged itself. L-A-N. She returned to the guest house and tore the veil from her bag. She grabbed scissors, matches, anything to cut it, but the blade dulled against the thread. The match hissed out before it could touch the silk. She looked into the mirror. The veil was on her. She hadn't touched it, but it was there, draped over her face, her shoulders, her soul. She opened her mouth to scream and saw that her lips had been sewn shut in the reflection. The village had a heart once, a place where drums echoed during weddings, incense thickened the air with plum and myrrh, and women in red lined up like blossoms waiting to bloom for the dead. That place was now a ruin near the edge of the western slope, overgrown, shuttered, buried in time. Lan found it by accident. She hadn't meant to walk that way, but the veil pulled her. Not physically, not yet, but it whispered, in dreams, in silence, in heatless wind. She stood before the house at sunset, a crumbling compound behind a broken stone wall. The door hung crooked. Bells tied to string jangled faintly with no breeze. Inside, everything was preserved in dust, as if someone had once cared to keep it sacred. A marriage shrine stood in the center of the room. Faded portraits, empty vases, a bridal fan cracked down the middle. Lan turned slowly and nearly stumbled back. A figure sat hunched in the corner. A woman. Old, so old, her body curved inwards like a prayer. Her eyes were shut, but her hands moved with memory, weaving invisible thread through invisible cloth. Lan whispered, "Are you the matchmaker?" The woman did not stop her motion. "I was." Lan stepped closer. "I need to know about the veil." "You already know," the matchmaker rasped. "You brought it back." The matchmaker's voice was dry silk, fraying with age. She didn't speak often, but when she did, every word came wrapped in the weight of regret. The veil was meant to bind the living to the lonely, a kindness, we thought, a way to give the dead company. But the dead are not grateful. Lan knelt before her. "Why me? Why now?" The old woman's hand stilled. "Because you came when it stirred. Because the last vow was never finished, and the veil waits for a bride to complete it." She looked toward the corner where an old bridal chest sat. "There were 13 brides before you, 13 weddings, but only 12 grooms buried. The last he never showed." Lan's breath caught. "And the bride?" "Gone, before the kiss, before the final thread." The old woman stood slowly, bones cracking like old wood. She opened the chest. Inside were wedding tokens, old coins, wilted lotus charms, brittle scrolls. And beneath it all, another veil. Not red, black. Lan's mouth went dry. This, the matchmaker said, was for the vow breaker, the girl who fled. She ran from the wedding? No. She ran before her heart could be sewn shut. The veil never forgave her. The old woman turned to Lan with eyes that had not seen in decades, but knew exactly where to look. "It doesn't want a bride," she said. "It wants revenge." That night, Lan did not return to the guest house. She stayed in the matchmaker's house, beneath the weight of its silence, its incense, and its secrets. The matchmaker boiled water from the old hearth and gave her tea that tasted of bitter plum and ash. "Do not sleep tonight," she warned. "Why?" "Because tonight is the 7th night." Lan swallowed hard. "The 7th since I arrived?" "No," the woman whispered. "The 7th since it chose you." At midnight, the wind began. Not outside, inside. It crawled through the slats of the floor, through the seams of the walls, whispering in a language older than words. The bridal shrine shook, candles guttered, and the veil, folded tightly beside Lan's bag, began to hum. The matchmaker sat silently before the altar, eyes closed, lips moving in chant. Lan clutched the magnifier, her recorder, and the veil itself. She didn't know why she held it. Maybe she hoped it would answer her. Maybe she wanted it to see her fear. But what it saw instead was willingness, and that was enough. Just before dawn, the wind stopped. Lan opened her eyes to find the matchmaker still sitting, but her hands were folded now, her lips still, her chest unmoving. The matchmaker was dead. But on her lap, the veil lay neatly folded, not the black one, the red, and on its hem a new thread still wet, a stitch that began with an L. Lan buried the matchmaker herself. No one in the village came. No one helped. No one spoke. She carved a simple marker from a rotting beam and planted it near the pavilion ruins. The wind stirred once more, soft as breath. From somewhere behind her, she heard a bell, a wedding bell. But no one was getting married. Not yet. That night, back at the guest house, Lan dreamed. She walked in a bridal procession alone, veil over her face, her hands bound in silk. No one held the palanquin, no music played, only the steady beat of footsteps behind her. She turned once and saw not people, but veils walking upright, trailing blood where their feet should be. At the front of the path stood the altar, empty, but waiting. And behind her, the 13th bride whispered, "You took my place." Lan woke up choking on silk and found the red veil knotted around her throat.
Lan had dug a grave with her hands. The matchmaker's body, wrapped in faded robes and tied with red thread, lay beneath a layer of soil on the slope just outside the village. No one came to witness. No incense was offered. No chants sung. Lan placed the bridal chest atop the mound, then lit a single match. The flame bent backward in the windless morning, as if refusing to bless the burial. The veil hadn't left her side. It no longer stayed folded. It drifted near her bed, coiled itself at her feet, slid across the wooden floor like a forgotten limb returning to life. And when she slept, it whispered in voices layered and broken, "Finish what was begun." By midday, Lan returned to the ruined pavilion. She needed answers. The dreams were no longer dreams. Her skin bore scratches in looping patterns as though the veil stitched her in her sleep. This time, she noticed something new. Half hidden beneath a curtain of banyan roots, a stone arch carved with 3 characters, nearly consumed by moths. Ming Huan Tan, Ghost Marriage Altar.
Lan's breath caught. The roots parted easily beneath her fingers, as if waiting. Behind them was a staircase descending into shadow, narrow, damp, breathing cool air that reeked of rotted silk and sandalwood long gone sour. She hesitated only once before entering. The staircase led to a chamber carved into the earth, walls painted with wedding scenes, brides with hollow eyes and grooms with no faces. At the center stood the altar. Its stone was blackened by centuries of incense. Candle stubs melted into its surface like bones buried in tar. Dried pebbles scattered the floor, and scattered among them were dolls. Porcelain bridal figures, arms outstretched, faces cracked and eyeless. The veil in her arms stirred. Lan stepped closer. There in the dust she saw it. A scroll, half unfurled, red ink fading, but the characters still legible. Lan, daughter of the southern line, is hereby joined in eternal matrimony to the spirit of... The name was smeared, but beneath it was a thumbprint, pressed in black blood. Fresh. She stumbled back, her voice caught in her throat. Had someone rewritten this, or had it always been there, waiting? The altar groaned, not metaphorically. It groaned, a sound like old teeth grinding against stone. The dolls fell over one by one. Lan dropped the veil, but it didn't fall. It hovered in the air, threads reaching toward the scroll like roots. She turned to run, but the exit was gone. The staircase sealed behind a wall of stone and root. The altar pulsed once, and then he stepped forward. Not a man, not a ghost, something between. He wore no face, only a smooth blank mask painted red. On his shoulders, fragments of a wedding robe, tattered and fused with earth. His hands were long, bone-thin, and he held a comb, red, the kind used to dress a bride before burial. Lan could not move. He stepped closer and raised the comb. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted her hair. She screamed only once, but no sound came, only the faint rasp of silk against scalp as he combed her hair 3 times. Once to cleanse your past, twice to bind your soul, thrice to seal your fate. When Lan awoke, she was on the ground outside the ruins. Dirt under her nails, doll fragments in her pockets, and the veil now tied around her waist like a bridal sash. She tore it off and threw it. It didn't fall. It floated back to her hand. She ran to the village shrine. It was abandoned, overgrown, its deity statues crumbling. But in the back room, what had once been the offerings chamber, there stood a figure, not divine, human. A woman, eyes white as milk, hair to the floor, seated cross-legged before a dead censer. The air around her buzzed. Lan whispered, "Who are you?" The woman's head tilted, and when she opened her mouth, it was not words that came out, but thread. Red thread. It poured from her lips in silence, coiling on the ground. She pointed to Lan's chest. The veil was no longer around her waist. It was draped over her shoulders, and stitched into it was a single new phrase: "The groom has arrived." That night, Lan tried to burn it again. She laid it on a pyre of camphor and rice straw, drenched it in kerosene, lit a match. Flames danced eagerly, but just as they touched the fabric, the fire reversed, sucked inward, extinguished in a whisper. And from the smoke rose the faint sound of footsteps. Not walking, marching, a procession. Lan hid in the guest house closet, clutching a recorder, whispering into the mic. Day 5. I believe the veil is alive. It remembers every vow ever spoken beneath it, and it wants to finish what was left undone. I think I am the final bride. From outside the door, she heard the drums, low, hollow, beating once, twice, then silence, then again, faster now, closer. Lan held her breath. The doorknob turned. She screamed, and then nothing. Silence. She opened her eyes. The door stood open, and hanging from it was the veil, floating in the air, waiting. Lan sealed every mirror in the guest house. She turned each one face down, wrapped them in black cloth, and pressed salt along their edges. Her grandmother had taught her that spirits moved most easily through reflections, and something was watching her from the other side now, not merely observing, but mimicking. The red veil no longer rested where she left it. It moved in silence. It chose where to be. Sometimes she'd find it coiled at the foot of her bed, sometimes draped across her suitcase, and once she found it gently folded on her pillow, as if tucking itself in beside her. She hadn't touched it for days, but when she looked into the bathroom mirror, just once, a flash before she turned it over, she saw herself wearing it, and smiling. She hadn't smiled. Lan wandered the village in the daylight, though daylight meant little here. The sky had forgotten the sun. Everything lived under a constant veil of ash-colored clouds. Even the villagers, those who still remained, no longer met her gaze. They crossed the street when she approached. They shut their doors when her footsteps echoed. Only one person dared speak to her. A child, no more than 8 years old, face streaked with soot, eyes far too old for her body. She stood beneath the shrine tree, plucking dead blossoms from its roots. Lan crouched beside her. "Do you know the veil?" she asked gently. The girl nodded. "It chose you." "Why?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she held up a paper doll she'd been crafting. It wore a red scrap of fabric across its face. Lan's voice trembled. "Is that me?" "No," the girl said. "That's what comes after you." Lan returned to the guest house and made the mistake of uncovering one mirror. Just one. She had to know. She had to see if the reflection matched her face. It didn't. In the mirror, she wore the veil, her hands folded neatly across her lap, her head tilted, her eyes closed, but her lips moved. And though Lan stood frozen in the real world, her reflection whispered something over and over in perfect silence. She leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. Then, the reflection opened its eyes. Not her eyes. They were wider, fuller, brighter. Another bride's. And in a flash, the veil in the mirror split open like a wound. Lan screamed and dropped the mirror. It shattered across the floor, but there was no glass. Only fabric, red silk, spilling across the tiles like blood. Lan began to change. She stopped remembering sleep. Her fingernails darkened to the color of dried rose petals. When she spoke, her voice echoed faintly, like it wasn't hers. Her recordings picked up things she didn't hear in the moment. A second voice, always beneath hers, chanting vows. She tried to leave, packed her bag, stuffed the veil inside a locked wooden box, and walked to the edge of the village path. But the road was gone. Not blocked, gone. In its place was a line of pale red blossoms blooming out of season, each one the size of a coin, each one with a single eye stitched into its center. She turned back. That night, she awoke to the sound of water, dripping, not outside, inside. She followed the sound to the bathroom. The mirror she had shattered was whole again, but fogged, and on the surface, written in streaks of condensation, were 3 characters. Jalaba, marry now. Lan smashed the mirror again, but this time blood spattered with the shards. Her hand was cut, though she hadn't touched the glass. She washed it in cold water, wrapping it in gauze. When she returned to her room, the veil sat folded on her bed, already stained with her blood. And where her pillow had been, there was now a wooden comb, red. She remembered the chant, once to cleanse your past, twice to bind your soul, thrice to seal your fate. She'd been combed once already. Now the second comb sat waiting. Desperate, Lan went to the village archives, what was left of them. Beneath the old schoolhouse was a half-collapsed storeroom filled with scrolls, census logs, death notices, most too brittle to touch. But one binder remained wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, 13 photographs, each one faded, each one of a bride standing alone in a veil. Some had names, some didn't, but all wore the same veil, hers. And the last photo slot was empty, except for a scrap of parchment that read, Lan, confirmed for 14th pairing. She tore the page from the binder, heart pounding. Something behind her shifted. She turned quickly, a figure in the corner, not moving, but watching, through a veil. Lan ran, not out of fear, but out of instinct, through the rain, through the trees, back toward the altar. She had to see it again, had to know if her fate was already carved into the stones. When she arrived, the altar was burning, no flame, no smoke, but glowing, its surface etched with light like molten script. Her name pulsed across it, and beside it, a mirror, tall, unbroken. She approached. Her reflection wore a bridal robe now, hands clasped in vow, mouth moving. Then, the reflection looked directly at her and whispered, "Say yes." Lan turned and fled, heart stuttering like a dying drum. When she reached the village again, the sky had turned red. No sunset, just red, bleeding across the clouds like the veil finally unwrapped across the sky. And somewhere in the distance, the third comb waited. Lan woke to silence. No wind, no birds, not even the hum of insects that had once whispered among the trees. Only the sound of paper sliding beneath her door. She stared at the envelope as if it might hiss. It was sealed with red wax in the shape of a lotus, its petals slightly melted into a curl. The paper, once white, had browned with time, creased, worn, and flecked with soot.
Lan picked it up with shaking fingers and turned it over. Her name was written on the front, in red. Not ink, but something thicker, darker, still wet. She opened it slowly. Inside was a scroll, yellowed rice paper, rolled around a spine of black bamboo. When she uncurled it, her hands trembled with a sudden chill. The script was hand-painted, elegant and ritualistic. It read, "By ancestral decree and binding thread, the 14th bride shall now be wed. At the hour of dusk on the 7th day, let the living bow, let the dead obey." Then came her name, full name, lineage included, and beside it, the groom's name. But it had been crossed out, overwritten in ink so dark it pierced the paper, leaving a hole in the scroll. Lan's gaze fell to the bottom, where a wax imprint of a thumbprint, black, smudged, sealed the contract. She hadn't signed it, but her fingerprint was already there. She threw the invitation into the fire pit. It refused to burn. Instead, the flames flickered blue for a moment, then extinguished with a hiss. And the scroll remained perfectly intact, floating gently back to the table. Lan backed away. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it music. Low, distant. A wedding melody played on reed flutes. But there were no flutes, no hands to play them, only ghosts in their instruments. Lan ran to the edge of the village, scroll in hand. She reached the last standing house before the path dissolved into mist. A priestess once lived there, or so the matchmaker had said. The woman who prepared the brides, painted their faces, offered incense to bind the worlds. Lan pushed open the door. Inside, the altar still stood, but everything else had turned to ash. Except one thing. A bridal robe, red, ornate, heavy with gold threading. It hung in the center of the room as if waiting for a body to fill it. And beneath it, folded neatly, were two items, the third comb and the bridal shoes. Lan stared down. The comb gleamed, carved of bone. Her breath caught. She turned to flee, but the door had vanished. The windows sealed. The ceiling began to darken, dripping, thick, slow drops of something sticky and crimson. The robe moved, not blowing, breathing. Lan dropped to her knees, covering her face. "I didn't agree," she cried. But the veil, now around her shoulders, tightened, and the scroll in her hands flared once more. New ink appeared. A date. Today. A time. Dusk. And beside it, one word. Confirmed. When the door finally opened, the sky had turned the color of clotted blood. Villagers had gathered. Not many. Not alive. They lined the street in silence, heads bowed, hands folded. Each one wore red thread around their wrists. The matchmaker, the seamstress, even the child. All stood like paper dolls come to life, watching as Lan stepped forward, veil trailing behind her like a second spine. No one spoke, but as she passed, each one whispered a line, not to her, to the veil. She reached the pavilion ruins by twilight. The ghost altar glowed faintly beneath the banyan roots. Candles lit themselves, one by one, as though unseen hands moved with ritual memory. A palanquin sat waiting, empty. Lan felt herself move without meaning to, toward it. She stepped inside. The veil covered her face, and the palanquin began to move. No bearers, no wheels, but it floated forward, carried by something she could not see and dared not name. Lan sat still, breath shallow, heartbeat lost beneath the rhythm of flutes and drums that came from nowhere and everywhere. They brought her to the field beyond the village, once used for festivals, now overgrown and barren. A circle of stones surrounded an earthen platform. On it stood the groom. He had no face, only a smooth red mask. In his hand, the fourth and final comb. Lon tried to cry out, but her voice was gone. Inside her throat, something had been stitched shut. The groom stepped forward, raised the comb, and for the third time, combed her hair. Slowly. Once. Twice. Thrice. The wind died, the earth trembled, and all the villagers bowed in perfect silence. Lon collapsed, not unconscious, not asleep, but between, held in a trance. And in that space between heartbeat and breath, a voice whispered through her teeth, "Now you belong." She woke beneath the stars, alone. The veil had melted into her skin, the robe into her spine, and her name was gone from her tongue. She tried to say it, couldn't. Only one word came when she opened her lips. Yes.
Lon had forgotten how to cry. She sat beneath the shrine tree, fingers clawing at the roots, trying to find herself inside her own skin. But something had shifted. She was no longer just wearing the veil, it wore her. She was the lining now, the flesh beneath silk, the breath behind thread. Around her wrists were faint red marks, soft but permanent, like thread had once sewn her hands together. And her reflection, when she dared glimpse it, was not her own. It blinked before she did. It smiled without her. She found her way back to the abandoned tailor's house. The seamstresses were gone. Only dust and old tools remained, spools of faded thread, rows of needles, stains that had once been dismissed as dye. She opened every drawer, every chest, looking for something, anything that could explain what she had become. Behind a rotting wall panel, she found a bundle of scrolls bound in crimson ribbon. Each one was thin, delicate, handwritten in iron ink. They were instructions, a manual, on how to sew the veil of binding. First, the name of the bride, written in blood and dried for 7 days. Second, the hair of the bride, woven into the lining. Third, the ash of the groom, folded into the seams. Fourth, the thread of sorrow, dyed in lotus root and funeral incense. Lon's breath caught. She unrolled another scroll, a list of brides, not just names, ages, dates. And in the margins, annotations. Screamed, struggled, required second binding. Walked willingly, strong spiritual match. Bride incomplete, groom never retrieved, veil unstable. The last entry bore no name, only her initials. LN. Selected. Groom awaiting match. Veil restless. She staggered to her feet. "Who are you sewing me to?" she whispered. But the veil stirred inside her satchel, still breathing, still pulsing, trying to cling to her fingers like ivy. She flung it away. But now both veils moved, the red and the black, twisting, tugging, weaving toward each other. Lon fled to the ruins beneath the banyan roots. She needed the altar, the place where it began. But when she arrived, the steps had vanished. The roots covered the entrance again, tighter than before. She dug with her hands, frantic, blood smearing her knuckles. And then the wind stopped. The village stood still. A shadow moved through the trees, slow, gliding, too large for a man, but too human to be anything else. It stopped just behind her. She didn't turn. She knew what it was, the groom, and he had waited long enough. "You were never meant for me," she said aloud, but the veil disagreed. It coiled tighter against her chest, winding across her back like a shawl made of hands. And then she remembered something. The black veil was never burned because it couldn't be, but maybe it could be finished, completed, unbound by being sewn all the way through. She returned to the tailor's house and took the bone needle. She placed both veils, red and black, upon the table, and with her own blood began to stitch them together. Each stroke felt like pulling thread through her own skin. Every puncture sent a jolt through her arms. But slowly, painfully, the veils began to fuse. The red absorbed the black like fire swallowing night. And when the final stitch was done, she collapsed. The veil pulsed once and lay still. She woke in the morning light, not gray, not ash. A single beam from the broken window spilled across the floor. The veil was gone, but in its place, a red thread ran from the sewing table all the way to the mirror. And in the mirror, Lon saw her own face again, tired, pale, but hers. She wept, the first real tears in days, but when she wiped them away, she saw something else. A girl, standing behind her, wearing the veil. Lon turned, but no one stood there. Only the shadow of a bride etched into the wall, and below it, scratched with fingernails. "You can never unsew what has been promised." Lon fled the house, veil or no veil, and returned to the field where the wedding had taken place. The altar was empty, the circle of stones now broken, but the earth still whispered. And in its breath she heard the voice again. "We are sewn to you, as you are sewn to us." And just like that, she understood. The veil had never been a garment. It was a promise, a contract, a shroud stitched with memory and mourning. And every time it was worn, it consumed a little more of the one who touched it, until the living became the lining, and the dead wore the face. Lon stood in the center of the circle and spoke aloud, "I will not finish the vow." The wind screamed, the earth split, and beneath her feet, hands clawed at the soil, brides, veils, fragments of bone. But Lon held her ground. "You were stitched to silence, but I have a voice." She reached into her satchel, pulled out the final scroll, the one with her name, and tore it in half. Silence. True silence. Then the veils scattered into ash. The altar cracked down the center, and the air sighed like an old wound exhaling. Lon fell to her knees, not in fear, in release. She had severed the thread, for now. The air was heavy with stillness. Lan had torn the scroll, she had severed the thread, but something inside her said it wasn't over. The veil was gone, but she wasn't free. She hadn't dreamed in days, not truly, but that night, after collapsing near the ruins of the altar, sleep came for her like a hand across her eyes, gentle, final. And she dreamed of drums, distant at first, then closer. Not festive, not celebratory, funereal. Their rhythm wasn't meant to be danced to, it was meant to be obeyed. Lan awoke in darkness. No moon, no stars, no fire. Just the faint glow of lanterns strung like pearls down the village road. She was barefoot. Her hands were bound with red silk, and the robe, the bridal robe, had returned to her body, stitched tight across her spine as if woven from her own nerves. She rose without will. She stepped onto the path and joined the procession. They moved in silence, figures robed in red, featureless, genderless, gliding down the slope like wind-blown paper. No faces, no feet, just outlines. Each one held a candle that did not flicker. Lan tried to speak. No voice, only breath, only steps. She looked down at her feet. Red shoes. When had she put them on? She couldn't remember. Or had she always worn them? The procession led her past the guest house. It no longer stood. In its place, a collapsed roof and a mirror nailed to a post. In the mirror, she saw herself marching, but not with the others, alone. And in her hands, she carried a bridal offering, incense, silver combs, and a porcelain bowl filled with rice. Blood dripped into it with every step, her own. They passed the matchmaker's shrine. It was burning, flames that made no sound. Inside the fire, she saw the woman seated at her old altar, smiling faintly, eyes closed, lips moving in endless repetition. She was still matchmaking, still chanting the names of the dead, still stitching fates together, thread by thread. Lan turned her head away, but the flames followed her in the reflection of every puddle. Finally, the procession stopped at the field. But now the field had changed. It was no longer a place. It was a threshold. The sky above was red silk, the ground below sheer black water, and in the center stood the groom, faceless, motionless, but waiting. Lan was pushed forward, not by hands, but by silence. The veil descended over her head from above as if the sky itself dropped it, and the ritual began. The officiant had no face, only a voice like wind moving through hollow bamboo. "Do you offer your breath to the one who waits?" Lan could not speak. The veil answered for her. "Yes." "Do you offer your blood to the one who remembers?" The veil answered, "Yes." "Do you offer your name so it may be replaced?" The veil whispered louder now, inside her ears, beneath her ribs, "Yes." The groom extended his hand. In his palm, the final gift, a thimble carved from bone. Lan reached forward, but her hand was no longer hers. The skin was paler, the nails longer, the veins beneath the flesh pulsed red. Someone else moved within her now, and she let them. The thimble slid onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The officiant raised a black thread between them, and with hands that shook and shimmered, Lan sewed the thread from her wrist to his, each stitch closing the space between them, each pull a vow, and when it was done, the thread disappeared, but its mark remained, a red line around her wrist, like a wedding band, but made of scar. Then came the final step, the kiss, not of lips, of silence. The groom leaned forward. Their foreheads touched. And in that moment, the veil split, not physically, but between worlds. Lan saw everything. The 13 before her, each bride stitched to shadow, each one lost to vow, and her, the 14th, the seamstress of completion, the final stitch, the ending thread. And then she awoke, in her bed, in the guest house, everything intact. Sunlight through the window, breath in her lungs, skin unmarred, the veil gone, no shoes, no robe, just her, alone. Except, on the floor was a trail of footprints, wet, small, delicate, red, and leading out the door. Lan followed them in silence, through the village, down the path, into the woods. The trees parted easily like they knew her, and at the end of the trail, a small mirror hanging from a branch. She looked into it and saw her wedding, happening still, forever. A loop of thread never snipped, a vow never silenced.
Lan no longer questioned what was real. Reality in Yanlu Village was not built on logic or daylight. It was layered, stitched like the folds of the veil, one over another, some made of smoke, some of silence, and some of memory that didn't belong to her. She walked through the village, and no one looked at her anymore, not in fear, not in contempt, but in reverence, as if she had become something other, a role they'd been waiting to see filled again. And as she passed the shrine tree, she noticed it had bloomed. Dead blossoms, red as blood, still as wax. That night, Lan followed a whisper, not words, just a pull, warm and soft like a thread brushing the skin. It led her to the old storage house behind the former village temple, half buried in vines and thick with rot. Inside was darkness, and in that darkness, light. Dozens of red candles, each set in a bowl of uncooked rice, flickering though no one had lit them. They sat on shelves, on steps, on the floor, and in their glow, photos. Dozens of them, black and white portraits, all brides, each one with the veil, each one staring straight into the camera, each one nameless. Lan moved among them slowly. Some of the candles were half melted, some just lit, some nearly gone. But one sat before an empty frame, the candle brand new, untouched. Lan stepped closer, and as she did, the photograph developed before her eyes. First, the outline, then the veil, then her face, smiling. She stepped back, but the room seemed to tighten. The shelves pulsed with heat, and all the brides turned their eyes to her. Every single photograph, every flicker of flame bending toward her body like hungry mouths. And then they began to speak, not aloud, inside. A murmur of hundreds layered into one voice. We are not gone. We are not quiet. We were brides. We were offered. We were forgotten. Lan shook her head. I'm not like you. The flames rose higher. Her veil began to form in the air, curling toward her from the candlelight. You are the last. You are the completion. You will burn,
as we burned, as we waited, as we watched. Lan ran, but the air followed, heavy, smoke thick, the scent of sandalwood, jasmine, and something older, charred silk and dried bone. The photographs fell from the walls as she fled, but the one of her did not. It glowed, as if it was only just beginning to burn. Back at the guest house, she collapsed onto the floor, breath hitching in her chest. The mirror across the room had cracked without reason. From edge to edge, a single split like a stitched scar. Her reflection wavered, and behind her, faint, almost a mirage, was a woman, a bride, veiled, face hidden, holding a red candle. Lan turned slowly. No one there, but the scent remained, and on her bed, a wax imprint in the shape of a kneeling figure, still warm. She returned to the candle room the next morning. Sunlight sliced through the broken ceiling, touching only a single spot. The photo frame where her image had developed was now empty again, but the candle was half burned. Time moved differently here. Every moment she resisted, the candle burned a little more, a little closer to the wick's end. She had to finish this before it consumed her completely. Lan took the candle, wrapped it in black cloth, and carried it to the altar beneath the banyan tree. The veil pulsed in her bag, but she ignored it. She placed the candle in the center of the altar and lit it. Then she sat cross-legged in front of it, palms up, eyes open. She whispered, "Tell me what you want." The flame answered. It grew tall, straight, silent. And from its light emerged images, not imagined, not dreamed, memories. A young woman sobbing beneath a bridal headdress. A family binding her wrists while she begged for release. A veil being sewn over her face. Not placed, sewn. Lan saw the matchmaker, younger, shaking as she embroidered a girl's name in gold thread. And then the final moment, the groom's family taking the girl to bury her beside a stranger, still breathing. Lan wept for the girl, for the many girls, for the silence they had been forced to wear, for the veil that fed on their surrender. "We are stitched to this earth," the voices whispered through the flame, "and until someone severs the final thread, we will walk." Lan looked down at the candle, almost gone. A single drop of wax fell, and as it did, the wind rose. Behind her, dozens of brides stood, some in veils, some in tatters, some only shadows, and they bowed to her, as if she was not one of them, but their answer, their last hope. Lan stood, trembling. The veil rose from her bag, wrapping itself around her shoulders like a cloak, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. She placed it over her head and walked toward the altar, candle in hand. If this was to end, it had to end through fire. She placed the candle at her feet, kneeled, and spoke, "I finish this not as your bride, but as your witness." She blew out the candle. The darkness swallowed everything. And then, silence, true, still, heavy as prayer. The candle had gone out, but the veil remained. Lan sat in the silence that followed, not empty silence, but full.
the kind that hummed beneath the skin like something ancient, listening, watching, waiting. She had knelt before the altar, not in surrender, but in defiance, yet the veil did not punish her for it. Instead, it softened. The fabric no longer clung like a parasite. It lay around her like water, like breath, like a memory gently resting upon her shoulders. When she pulled it away and stood, she knew something had changed. It no longer needed to possess her. It needed to reveal something. That night, she returned to the guest house one last time. She had stopped sleeping in the bed. The dreams were never dreams anymore. They were rehearsals, each one showing her another step in the ritual, each one drawing her nearer to a burial that hadn't happened because something had been left undone. She tore open the floorboards beneath the guest house, not because she suspected, because she knew. The ground had whispered it to her. And there, between layers of rotting wood and packed earth, she found bones, wrapped in silk, not fully decayed, still waiting. The groom, or what was left of him. No coffin, no markings, just the veil, torn and fused to his ribcage. She touched it, and the vision came instantly. Not a memory, a possession. She stood in the matchmaker's house many years ago. Rain fell hard outside. Thunder cracked like a spine splitting. The groom-to-be was lying on a straw mat, lips blue, body still. He had died the night before the wedding. Heart failure, they said, or maybe fear. The bride had never met him. She had been promised, and promises were sacred. The veil had been completed, the date set. A ghost marriage was arranged, but something had gone wrong. The bride ran into the woods with the veil. She tried to burn it, but it wouldn't catch. She buried it instead beneath the banyan tree. But the groom's family, furious, buried his body in secret with a backup veil sewn by a different hand, a broken veil, a wrong veil. And with it, they cursed the ritual. Because his spirit could not find her. It searched, it wandered, and it began pulling others into the vow. Bride after bride, veil after veil, until it came full circle to Lon, the one who carried both the veil and the truth. She gasped and stumbled out of her vision, back into her body. The bones beneath her trembled faintly. She knew what she had to do. He hadn't been buried properly, not with his real bride, not with his proper veil. The promise had been broken, and the veil had been collecting witnesses ever since. Lon looked down at the bones and whispered, "You waited too long." She retrieved the final veil, the one that had wrapped itself around her for days, the one that had sewn itself into her name. She unfolded it fully for the first time. It stretched far longer than it should have. The fabric shimmered, not red, but crimson black, threaded with sorrow, inked with silence. She wrapped it gently around the bones. This time, the veil did not resist. It fused to the skeleton, tightening like a second skin. And when she tied the final knot, she heard the breath, one exhale from the earth. She carried the remains to the ruined altar beneath the banyan tree. By torchlight, she dug a grave with her hands. There was no one to help, no one left who remembered. She lowered the bones into the soil, still wrapped,
still humming. She placed the original scroll beside the body, now complete with her name and his name uncrossed. Then she lit incense, 3 sticks, as tradition demanded. When the 3rd stick burned out, the ground stopped whispering. The air grew still, and from the shadows, the groom appeared. Not in body, but in shape, a figure formed from smoke and sorrow, outlined by starlight. No face, just a presence, a bowed head, and hands that held something out to her. Lam reached for it. The veil, folded, no longer warm, no longer alive, just silk, finally still. She whispered, "Is it done?" The groom did not speak, but he nodded once, and then he stepped backward into the earth, fading, returning. The soil sealed itself without a sound. No wind, no scream, just peace. A terrible, aching peace, the kind that only comes when something old is finally buried. Lan stayed beside the grave until sunrise. Birdsong returned. For the first time in weeks, she heard birds. She wept, not for herself, but for every bride that came before her, and every groom that was never buried. She folded the veil for the final time and placed it atop the grave. Then she walked away barefoot, robes torn, skin stained, but whole, unbound, alive.
The grave was closed. The veil was still. Lan believed it was finished, but in Yanlu Village, things never stayed buried for long. She returned to the guest house, not to sleep, but to wait. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her spirit felt strangely detached, as though something essential had been pulled loose in the burial. She thought perhaps this was the cost of setting things right. Peace, after all, had never come cheaply. That night, just past the hour of midnight, the veil returned. Not by door, not by hand. It lay at the foot of her bed like a child curled in sleep, soft, familiar, glowing faintly under moonlight. But it was different now, heavier, stained, and bound by something new, a thread, thicker than before, deep red, clotted, still wet. It formed a spiral in the center of the veil, knotting inward like a vortex stitched into cloth. Lan picked it up, and the moment she touched it, she heard the whisper. One more vow, one more stitch. She dropped it, stumbling backward, heart racing. I buried him. I gave the veil back. I gave everything. The veil did not move, but the thread inside it pulsed. Lan went to the banyan grave before dawn. The earth was undisturbed, but something had changed. Atop the soil sat a bowl, porcelain, old, cracked. Inside, ashes, not of the groom, of the veil. Or so she thought, until she touched them, and the ashes screamed. Lan recoiled. The ashes were alive, or rather bound, a soul not released, but stitched into the threads, desperate to be freed. She returned to the shrine ruins, dug beneath the altar, tore through brittle scrolls, crumbling artifacts. Finally, she found it, a single page, thin, rotted, but legible.
In the event of an incomplete burning, when the veil is buried yet remains, the final stitch must be sewn not by hand, but by blood. She reread it again and again. Not a blood, her blood. The veil wanted more than closure. It wanted commitment. It wanted a life fully sewn into its fabric. Lan stood in the center of the shrine, veil draped across her arms, and stared into the cracked mirror on the far wall. Her reflection wore the veil already. Head bowed, smile painted in blood, and behind her, a line of brides, all watching, some weeping, some grinning, some missing faces altogether. She didn't remember picking up the needle, but suddenly it was there. Bone, sharp, familiar. The same one that the matchmaker had once used. Lan pricked her finger. One drop, red. She let it fall onto the spiral stitch in the center of the veil. It sank instantly. The cloth hissed, and then it began to move. The thread slithered up her arm, wrapped around her wrist, tight, burning, a bracelet of blood and silk. "Say the vow," the veil whispered. Lan closed her eyes and spoke. "By thread and ash, by name and night, I bind what walks into the light. Let veil be bone, let vow be breath. I sew my soul to silence and death." The wind howled, the mirror shattered, and the veil shot forward, wrapping her like a cocoon, pulling her into the center of the shrine. Lan gasped, body lifted from the ground, arms suspended in air, as the veil threaded itself around her chest, her throat, her eyes. It didn't suffocate. It sealed, each wrap another binding, not to death, but to memory. She saw every bride before her, every groom left unnamed, every stitch sewn by grief. And then she saw herself, a girl, a woman, a vessel, the 14th thread, the closing spiral, the final offering. When the veil fell away, she stood alone in the shrine, her skin unmarked, her breath slow, but the thread remained around her wrist, no longer burning, now cool, now permanent, a red ring, not stitched, branded. She walked out of the shrine barefoot. It was morning, real morning. The mist had lifted. The sun cracked the horizon like an egg spilling light across the trees. And the villagers, what few still lingered, stood along the path in silence. They bowed as she passed. No fear, no mourning, just reverence. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was the keeper of the veil, the one who closed the vow, the witness to every stitch. At the edge of the village, she turned one last time. The banyan tree swayed gently, the altar glowed faintly, and the ashes had cooled. The thread still circled her wrist, but it no longer pulled. She could choose where to go, and for the first time, she walked without the veil behind her.
The village was quiet, too quiet, not peaceful, hollow, as if something sacred had been stolen from the soil. Lan walked the path slowly, the thread around her wrist gleaming faintly under the early morning light. It no longer throbbed, no longer tugged, but it was there, a reminder. She had finished the binding, but not the vow. Something inside her stirred, a presence, not malicious, but unfinished.
The veil may have let go, but the words still lingered, and words, once sown into the breath, could not be unsaid. That evening, she returned to the field where the hollow wedding had first begun. The ground remembered her footsteps. The stone still circled the space. The altar stood, rebuilt. She hadn't done it. Someone had. Or something. Placed neatly at its base were 13 candles, red, short, each marked with a symbol, and a 14th, taller, unlit, centered in the middle. Lon understood what it meant. 13 brides who had vanished into the veil, and her, the one who remembered. She lit the candles one by one. As she did, the air thickened, not cold, heavy. And then they arrived, one by one, brides in red, pale faces hidden behind silk. Each one floated just above the grass. They surrounded her in a circle, each holding a thread connected to her own wrist, threads that shimmered like glass, barely visible, but deeply felt. Lon stood in the center, veil over her shoulders, voice shaking. I saw you, I remember you, and I name you. One by one she spoke names pulled from scrolls, from dreams, from silence. Each time she spoke, a bride lifted her head, and with each name, a thread unraveled. Finally, only one remained. The 13th bride, the first bride, the one who ran, the one whose vow was never finished. Lon stepped toward her, hands trembling. This bride wore no shoes. Her feet were caked in soil and ash. Her veil was torn, but her presence, it burned, like grief made flesh. Lon whispered, "You weren't a coward." The bride looked up. Her eyes were black, not empty, full, with memory, with mourning, with fury. Lon continued, "You broke the vow because it was wrong, because it wasn't yours." The bride's hands twitched. The thread between them pulled tight. "Then why did you finish it?" the bride asked. "Why did you let it touch your name? Why did you let it live in you?" Lon knelt. "Because there was no answer, only truth. Because I was afraid to be forgotten," she said, "like all of you were." The bride stepped forward, laid a hand on Lon's shoulder. "Then carry us, but do not become us." The 13th bride reached up and pulled her own veil off. Underneath, a face exactly like Lon's, but older, tired, with threads stitched into the mouth. The bride lifted a finger and cut them. They fell in slow spirals to the earth, and the sky split open. Light poured through the field like spilled milk. The altar cracked, the candles flared and vanished. Each bride shimmered into flame, their forms becoming embers in the wind. Lon stood in the center, eyes wide, alone again, but lighter, unstitched, except the thread on her wrist remained, now loose, now limp. She lifted it gently, wrapped it into a spiral, and placed it into the soil, not as a curse, as remembrance. She stood and whispered the final vow, not in submission, but in love. "Walk no longer, silent ones. Let the earth close around your names. Let the sky remember your laughter. Let your veil fall into dusk, I release you." The air sighed, and in that breath, the veil behind her fell to the ground, empty, no longer red, no longer cursed, just fabric. That night Lon slept without dreams, and in the morning she woke with no veil, no thread, no weight, just herself and silence, real silence, not haunted, not hollow, but earned.
Dawn arrived in Yanlu Village with a sound no one had heard in decades. Birdsong. Not eerie, not haunted, just the soft warble of life returning where death had once made its nest. Lon stepped into the road barefoot, dust clinging to her feet, breath slow, skin no longer prickling with dread. Her body felt weightless, as if for the first time it belonged wholly to her. No threads beneath her skin, no silk clinging to her shoulders. The veil was gone. So were the brides. So was the vow. The villagers emerged like ghosts waking from sleep. Elderly women blinked into the light. Men who had kept their shutters nailed shut stepped outside. A child, perhaps the same one who had drawn paper dolls by the shrine, ran barefoot through the path, laughing. No one spoke of the veil. No one had to. It had lifted, and with it a silence that had gripped them for generations. Lon walked past them all, no longer a stranger, no longer a vessel. A witness, a keeper of memory. At the far end of the village, beyond the last stone lantern and the withered shrine tree, stood the final reminder of what had passed, the banyan grave. Still fresh, still quiet, but no longer weeping. Lon knelt beside it, fingers brushing the soil. She whispered nothing, because silence now was sacred. She left only one thing behind, the thread, coiled neatly, tied into a knot. She pressed it into the ground and covered it with earth. Let it become root, let it forget how to bind. She descended the mountain path alone. The forest parted for her like a curtain. The sun filtered gently through the trees, gold washing across her face. Halfway down the slope, she turned once. The village was already fading into the mist, no longer cursed, just forgotten, as it had always wanted to be. Lon didn't go home. She followed the road further than she ever meant to, through towns, through silence, through years. She spoke of the veil only once, to a girl whose eyes reminded her of reflection. The girl listened, said nothing. But later Lon found a red thread tied to her own satchel, thin, faint, loose. Not a curse, a remembrance. She grew older. Gray began to weave itself through her hair like threads she no longer feared. And on the night of her 65th birthday, she lit 3 incense sticks, just as she had at the altar, and placed them in a bowl of uncooked rice. She did not ask for forgiveness. She offered gratitude to the ones who had waited, to the ones who had warned her, to the ones who had walked before her so she could walk away. Lon died in her sleep. No veil on her face, only wind at her window. The villagers buried her at the edge of a new town where the roads were paved and the mirrors were whole. No one knew her story, except the girl she once told it to, who now kept a folded piece of red silk in a wooden box beneath her bed. She never wore it, she never feared it, but sometimes, late at night, when the wind was just right, she swore she could hear soft laughter and the faint echo of wedding drums. In Yanlu Village, the banyan tree still stands. No veils hang from its branches. No brides walk the path. Only roots growing gently into the earth, and petals, red and pale, falling without sound into the soil. Not mourned, not remembered, just part of the world again.